Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the After Action Report this week or this month. We're with the legend Bob Ingram. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very good, Bob. Mike, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. Again, for us, this is a huge honor because Chief Ingram was our chief for a little while before he punched out into the sunset. So we got to serve a couple years under him, and it was an absolute pleasure. Sort of under. You were at the terrorism unit at the time, but we still got to interact.
You didn't? I thought you were in the company before 2007. No.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yes,
Yeah.
you switched over to the terrorism center. Yep,
Right, in 2007. So I did have a little bit of time there. But
that's right.
Did you have time with Billy Conway?
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Billy was the second battalion chief that came over to help me in the battalion after 9/11. Pete Stubbe was the first one, and then Bill Conway came over. But Bill had also worked previous to that with George Mayer prior to 9/11 when we were doing training, and they were handling the chiefs up on the second floor of Building 8. So that was going back around, I'd say 97, 98.
That's
For a long
great.
time.
So-
Little story about Bill. I was going home one day in my uniform in the unmarked car, and I happened to get a phone call from the office on the expressway. I get pulled over by a Nassau County Highway Patrol guy, and it happened. He looking at me, and he says, "You know why I pulled you over?" I said, "Yeah, I was on the phone. I'm the chief of hazmat in the city. I got a phone call from the office. There was an issue." He said, "Well, you work in hazmat?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know Bill Conway?" I said, "Yeah, he works for me." And that's great. Oh, that's good. I'll just put the phone down and don't do it again. About a year later, I'm going into the city in the HOV lane about 6:05, 6:15, and I see the highway patrol car pull over. Oh, and he tells me, I'm sorry, let me go back. He tells me, "Okay, I'm married to Bill's sister." So that's Bill's brother-in-law. So he says, "Just put the phone down and just move on your way." So now a year later, I see the highway car pull behind me. Then he pulls alongside me. I turn on the inside light. Maybe you see the uniform. He gets back behind me and puts his lights on, pulls me over. And I realize it's the same guy.
Oh, no.
But at that point, Bill and his wife had divorced, so I didn't want to bring that up.
Oh,
Just take me, man. Just take me.
Yeah.
Holy cow. That's great.
Yeah.
We were talking before the show is like, if whoever's watching this right now is curious of what we're doing here, is that we're trying to get the guys that were instrumental in beginning hazmat as we know it in at least the United States. I know we have a lot of people that listen to us from around the world, but a lot of the guys that we try to get on the show were the guys that formed hazardous materials as we know it, the response in the beginning. And so we like to pick the brains of people that were there in the beginning and try to archive what they thought and what they felt, and even sprinkle in some anecdotes and funny stories like highway patrol was picking you up. But getting some pictures from back in the day. Like, one of the things that rocked my world is when Rick Emery came on, and he was like, there were no phones. Like, we didn't have faxes, and I'm like, how did you do it?
We actually had a phone in Hazmat 1 when we first started, but we had the modem that was connected to the internet, so to a cell service, I guess it was, and we had to take the connection from the computer and Velcro it to the modem to be able to get the connection. And you really couldn't do it while you were driving. You either had to get it done before you left the quarters, or you had to do it when you got to the scene.
that's so.
Yeah, but Rick would know. He's a really old guy.
That's what I heard.
Within FDNY, you're kind of a unicorn in the hazmat world, because we had Phil McCardle on, who was a founding member. You were a founding member of Hazmat 1, but you also went through all of the ranks within hazmat to retire as a battalion chief. But at one point, you actually did run almost like a deputy chief over the entire hazmat program. So can you give us any insight on what that was like?
Well, when I took over, it was on September 12th of 2001, after the chief of hazmat, Jack Fanning, was killed in the South Tower. It was a nightmare, quite honest. And one of the things you mentioned in the little sheet that you gave me before was one of the, if anything I regret. I tell you, those first couple of years after 9/11, I probably needed a better balance between work and home. That was really something that I've thought about a few times since. But we had a lot of help. I've been very fortunate for my entire career. One of the early mentors that I had was Jack Fanning when I was still a fireman in hazmat, and Jack came in as one of the captains. I really picked up a lot from him. He was a mentor. He would allow people to learn. He would help them. He would support them, and that's one of the things that I hope that I did a lot of during my career. Give people the tools to do the job, let them run with the job, and then just check and make sure that the job was getting the end result. But in the days right after 9/11, I don't know if Phil talked about this, but we had, through Jack, we had a lot of connections from the IAFF in the hazmat world. And that hazmat network has been a tremendous asset for my entire career. But we had Al Valeriardi from Waterford, Connecticut, and his hazmat techs come down, and they stayed for a week or two or three testing every one of the close to 1,000 level A's that we had in stock to make sure that we could put them out into the companies that lost them when their apparatus were crushed. We had Tom Fitzpatrick, there were three Fitzpatricks. There was Tom Fitzpatrick from FDNY, who actually was another mentor of mine. He brought me back as a lieutenant from the fire field to start writing the first hazmat training program for the FDNY in 1992. There was a Fitzpatrick, Tom, that was running the Yonkers hazmat, and there was a Tom Fitzpatrick that was running the hazmat in Buffalo. Buffalo team came down and they were running the shifts for hazmat, filling in the holes with their hazmat techs at that time. So Chicago, I was on the phone with Gene Ryan, the head of hazmat for Chicago, when the first plane hit. And Chicago, within a day, had like a convoy of trucks and equipment and 60 guys on its way. Bobby Holton, from New Mexico at the time, Albuquerque. He was a shift commander. Bobby grew up around the corner from me, and some connections, and some of it through my brother Tommy. My brother Tommy had a landscape business on the side of being a fireman, and he cut their lawn. But Bobby called me up like the second day after, like the 12th or 13th of September. And he said, Bob, I've got a horse trailer loaded with equipment. Me and a fireman are driving it across the country from New Mexico. I'll meet you at the Candlelight Diner in Comac. And
Wow.
we hooked him up with Tech Services, Robin Mundy Sutton, and with her, they got the equipment in there, and Bobby was just great. Robin Sutton Mundy, tremendous help for both myself and John Norman after 9/11. So that was just unbelievable what she was capable of doing. She knew what we needed. She knew the equipment on our apparatus. She made it her personal business to order all of that stuff without even having to wait for us to ask or wait for the budget to approve it.
Wow.
She knew we were going to need it, and she just started ordering right away. She did a tremendous amount of help for the hazmat group. So like that's a long answer to your question. The short answer was just had a lot of help from people in the hazmat community that really helped us after 9/11. Bill Conway was another one, and there was no hazmat division before 9/11. It really came about when Nick got promoted to deputy. Um, which was kind of a timely thing. I know they made a big bunch of deputies, and he was in that big bunch at the time. But I was already in discussion to move and split the position in two, because I was still doing probably at that time 15 or 20 weeks a year on the road with the federal government and the state meetings. But still having to come back. And at the time, I had to personally sign all of the FS 260 overtime forms, and there were 200 or 300 a week because of all the hammer team activities.
Sure.
So I was constantly talking to the Frank Crothers, Chief Crothers, and the people down at headquarters to split my job and put somebody in charge of hazmat and put me into intergovernmental affairs. Finally, when they saw an opportunity to have Nick get promoted, and by that time we already had the battalion, so it was big enough to be a division. If I have the numbers right, probably before 9/11, we had, between the rescues, the squads, and hazmat, somewhere like under 700 people in special ops. By the time we got done building out the tiered response, it had to be close to 3,400 members of the department that were trained above hazmat ops. So it was really a division size. So when Nick was getting promoted, they saw the opportunity to move me over to the terrorism center. It wasn't my first choice. My first choice was to go to work for the Deputy Commissioner for Intergovernmental Affairs, or Chief Crothers, who was first deputy at the time. And or was he the first deputy? I think he was, to do that. Because I thought that's where most of my time was being spent, in intergovernmental affairs. But at that same time, Chief Pfeiffer had gotten approved for his in-residence master's program at Harvard. So they were looking for somebody to run the terrorism center. So they were going to put me over to do that. But then, and you and I were talking before, Bob, sometimes about how having a rank and not having a rank makes a difference.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody at headquarters decided that the terrorism center was enough of a high profile, it needed a deputy. So they didn't have me run it. They brought in Mike Pusaferi, Chief Pusaferi, did a great job, absolutely a great job. But so I ended up staying there and just doing a lot of the intergovernmental work and being a liaison between hazmat ops and the center, which was really good. But it all comes down to the network. The hazmat network is incredible. Within the department, but particularly outside of the department. You talked about some of the people that you had on the show already, but Jack got me onto the 472 committee back in 1999. The first edition had just come out 2 years before. So I worked with John Eversole, Greg Knoll. I worked with Jerry Gray out of San Francisco, Danny Schnell out of Houston, then Bob Royal out of Houston, Charlie Wright out of the Union Pacific Railroad. That network, you could, and as Tony Musafidi has always said, I'm only 2 phone calls away from an answer. If my first phone call doesn't have the answer to one of my questions, that person's going to know who does. And so the network has been really beneficial. One regret I do have is not taking the deputy's test a second time. I studied for it once for a good hour, and ended up with a 58, and then I said no more. So.
You all right? So you were one of the charter guys on FDNY's hazmat, and at that time, which for FDNY's it was September 22nd, 1984, was when the company fully took effect. And I would say there was like 7 or 8 other companies around the country that started on basically the same time frame. When did paint the picture? When did it come? Like, when did you guys start responding? Like, did you guys get the rig and then it was a slow ramp up, like the squads? Like, they came in and then it was kind of like they went out to training, they came back. They went out to train. Like, how did that work?
No, we actually had 60 people volunteer for the company initially, and they narrowed it down to 35. The Captain Gallagher and the lieutenants, John Calderon, Al Jordan, Chief Jordan's father, and who was was it Joe Buell
Hopkins?
Originally? No,
Was it
not Hopkins. Hopkins.
No, he was a fireman.
Yeah. John Hopkins, and that's another funny story. I did a hazmat class for FDNY for recruits about 2 years ago, and I'm waiting for the crew to come in the first day, and the squad leader comes in, probationary firefighter Hopkins reporting for duty, all present and accounted for. So I grab him and I said, "Hopkins, huh? Is your father a battalion chief in the 5-0?" And he said, "Yes, he is." And I said, "I worked with him." "Was your grandfather a charter member of the hazmat company?" He says, "Why, yes, he was." I said, "I worked with him too. I think it's time to retire."
Oh my God. It happens so fast. So
Oh,
freaking
yeah.
fast. It's not even funny.
Absolutely. But yeah, there were maybe half a dozen. Houston was in there. Houston has a tremendous hazmat potential down there. They have so many issues with the water, with the land, with the refineries. Jacksonville, Ron Gore. Actually, one of the first training sessions we had gotten outside of hazmat. Ron Gore at the time from Jacksonville had his own company doing hazmat training. And he was actually doing a seminar in Hicksville. The Hicksville Volunteer Fire Department had a hazmat team going back to them. And probably about 6 or 8 of us went to the seminar there, and it was on cylinders and dealing with cylinders on fire, which was, we tried to get every training bit we could. But the initial 60, Gallagher and the lieutenants did a great job, I thought, of really selecting a good mix of people. We had people like myself and Vinnie Doherty with just about 3 years on the job, and Phil, Rick Gimbel, maybe with 2.5 years on the job at the time, all the way up to John Hopkins, who had, probably 33 or 34, and Nat Russo, and Billy Bolkerman, and we had Kevin Cully and Vinny had chemistry degrees and were working with pharmaceutical companies. We had Bolkerman was a licensed pesticide and exterminator, applicator and exterminator. Just everybody had some skill and some talent. And John Norman was there with his knowledge in sprinklers and plumbing and piping, and it was just a really good mix. But the first day of training, what do you think would be the first thing they do in training?
I would venture to say terrorism, but that's all that we did. So I don't know what would be a 1984 first training day.
One of the first things they did was put us in level A's and had us run through the suits so they could eliminate anybody right away who was claustrophobic and not waste any more time on them.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I did an EPA class down in Philadelphia. And the hotel they put me up in was right across the street from the Philadelphia hazmat team. You know what the one criteria was at that time for them to get into the hazmat company?
No,
They only had one size suit. If you fit in the suit, you were good.
Oh, there's a lot of guys that would have been taken out by a one size suit rule.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
What ended up? What got you? You did the tryout. What sparked your interest in hazmat before hazmat even started? Like, what made you go, you know what, I'm going to try that?
I think I've always wanted to take every opportunity to learn, even before the fire service, but even after, every opportunity to learn I took. because I just felt it would make me safer, it would make me better at my job, and it would help me with other people. So I think that was part of it. The fact that it was going to involve schooling, that it was going to be something I hadn't done before. Although I had chemistry in college, I had chemistry in high school. Um, and I did a little stint before the fire department as a co-owner of a delicatessen and a butcher shop. And I was on my feet behind the counter. We were in East Northport, right across the street from the train station. We opened at 5 in the morning and we closed at like 9 or 10 at night.
Wow.
So long hours every day. And you're just talking to people all day long. And when I got to my first firehouse there, 163 truck in Queens in Woodside, it was okay, get in the firehouse, we're closing the doors and we're going to stay inside and just talk to one another until we get a call. Then we're going to go out and do our job, and then we're going to come back and close the doors. And the idea of being citywide and doing a lot of different types of calls and responses just had an appeal to me. So that really led me down that path.
That's interesting.
That's pretty cool.
So
yeah.
A question just came in. It's actually a pretty good one. I like this one. Is what was the biggest hazard in the day? Like lack of information on the source. What was your number one?
Well, right from the get-go, you had a lot of your petroleum spills. You had your illegal dumpings. We were dealing with a lot of the landfills back then. Landfills on Staten Island. We were going to the one in Staten Island, the big one there off of 440. I'd say, once a month. I can remember that landfill was so big that to get up to the top, they were building paved roads for the garbage trucks to get up onto the top. And what they were doing to light it, they were putting light poles along the paved roads so the trucks could, pretty much go 24 hours a day. But when they dug the holes down for securing the poles into concrete, they created voids that allowed the methane gas to come up and was igniting on the wires inside the poles.
Oh, so Staten Island is literally built over, the whole thing is a landfill. Like they just paved
much.
right over it. They didn't move the garbage. They just, like poltergeists.
Yeah. So we would go up there and we'd be there for hours just pouring water down these holes underneath the light poles, and crazy stuff like that. There was always a lot of weird ones. One that always stuck out in my mind, and I know I probably experienced it maybe 4 or 5 times, and I know Michael Kelly did once, maybe Ed Bergamini, the old jewelry stores where they would have the old safes. And
the Pickering?
Yeah. The safes would be so old because there's no damaging them, but a lot of the old ones were built with these tubes, the vials of Pickering in the back. And in case in the olden days when the safe crackers would try to come in and drill through it, they'd break the vial and cause them to go out. That one was the first one I had of those. Really, it took us back a little bit, including the chemist from DEP. We sat there and scratched our heads for a little while till we figured out that one.
If it makes you feel any better, I think they had one of those about two years ago.
Yeah.
2-3 years ago. I don't know.
Yeah.
Time doesn't make any sense to me anymore. But they, they were using the AP4C. They were trying to figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that there was something with the safe, but they needed to put pieces together. So yeah, those runs still happen.
Yeah, I remember Mike, and I'm not sure if Michael Kelly had that one because he was still working, I think, at that time. But I ended up talking to him later that day, and I said, "How was everything going?" He said, "Oh, we had this weird one in this jewelry store." And I said, "Oh, was it Pickering, chloropickering?" He said, "How'd you know?" But did Phil tell you his acetylene cylinders tests? Well,
No.
we used to get the acetylene cylinders that would catch fire.
Yeah.
And they'd be near fire, and the fusible plugs would burn out, and the acetylene would come out and ignite, and we'd have these flame jets coming out of there. So we used to go in there with dry chem extinguishers or CO2 and put the fire out and then plug them up with golf tees. And we used wooden golf tees. And then we found that after a while, the wood was porous. It wasn't really a permanent stop, so it would weep its way through. So then we tried using plastic golf tees, and that didn't help because the plastic melted from the hot metal.
Oh.
So we had one where Phil was going to try putting a glue on the wooden golf tee to try and help it, but the glue had, of course, a flammable nature to it.
Oh.
So when they tapped them in there, they blew them right out, and the flame jets went up about 10 feet.
Holy
Oh,
cow.
trial and error back then. It must have been insane.
Somebody is saying here that did you guys ever run into the perk?
Not
fire
that
extinguishers?
not that extinguisher, no, but we did. Perchloroethylene was still used in the dry cleaners back then.
Dry cleaning.
Yeah. So we had a few of those.
Yeah, even when I got on, there was still a bunch of illegal perk dumpings that we would go to. Yep.
There was a serious one in the Bronx. Bronx or Upper Manhattan. They lost a whole family, I think.
Wow.
There was a family that was running the dry cleaner. They usually closed at 8 or 9 o'clock. The pizza store next door closed at 10 or 11. Went to go lock up on the outside and realized the dry cleaner's door was still open. The lights were still on, and they had the perk down below in a cellar. And a couple of the family members were down there. One went down, the other was down to get them, and one after
Just
another.
overcome with the fumes?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that. That's crazy.
It's a few years back, but that was there.
What was the, you mentioned that you had gotten onto not 1990, the 472 back in the 90s. When you first got on in 84, what was the regulatory
There wasn't really any
environment? There was nothing, right? Like as Wild West as Wild West gets.
Right. I had to look that up a little bit, but OSHA didn't come in until 89, March 6th of 89. And I don't think it was really official until March 6th of 90. And EPA 311, 40 CFR 311, that was in the same year. And NFPA's first.
You guys really, like, all the teams start up in like 84, 85 because of the Bhopal, right? Is that basically the genesis of why the teams start up? Because you don't go from Bhopal to having teams set up in like 6 months. It doesn't make sense logistically. No. So what was the genesis of that?
Well, for us in New York City, it was the LPG tank truck on the George Washington Bridge in
1978.
80.
80, sorry.
80, yeah. And
wow.
But before that, Jacksonville is a big port. They had hazmats there for a long time. Houston, a big port, rail lines, trucking, refineries. They had hazmats there at a much bigger scale than we ever did in New York, just because of the population density that the city, we just didn't have room for big manufacturing or processing facilities, refineries. So those teams around the country that started up. Chicago, I don't remember exactly when they started, but John Eversole was involved with that at a very early time. They had major rail hubs going through there carrying all sorts of hazardous materials. So that was really the impetus. You get one of those calls in your area, then you realize you got to start ramping up your capabilities.
But like you was just saying, like, and I'd like to get back to that, is the RCRA and all that stuff did come from Bhopal.
Some of it did, yeah. Some of it also came from the chemical company up in upstate New York that dumped all that. Love Canal. That was back in that time too. That was in the mid 70s, and they thought they capped that, and it came back again in like the late 80s and 90s. After they thought they had it resolved and they were letting people build on it again and go back there, they had a second case with it.
what did the detection equipment back then look like? Right, you came onto the team. You talked about the modem and the phone. What did that look like? What are you walking in with in 1984? You're getting off the rig and you're doing your recon, your entry, whatever you even called it back then. What are you carrying?
Well, for flammables, we had the MSA explosive meter, which was an aspirating bulb that you had to squeeze to draw the sample through the cylinder or across the Wheatstone bridge, and you would get, a reading if you had a flammable material. You had to be careful with it because that was where some of the information about sucking in corrosive vapors would damage the Wheatstone bridge. And back then, instruments were few and far between, so we were trying to be very careful. Now, we know to think about the life being more important. If it's going to tell you something's there that makes you safer, but you burn up the instrument, so be it. But back then, there wasn't the case. And with the old explosive meters, if you went above the lower flammable limit, it would kick back to zero. So it didn't stay up in that range. It would go back. So you wouldn't really know that you were in that flammable range then. So you had to almost watch that thing as you went along. We didn't have any of the other electronics. We had colorimetric tubes, the old Draeger, and that was also a bellows pump. We had to read the fine print that you could find in English and not in German.
65, 66, 67.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And hope that you weren't colorblind to see the color change in the reagent material.
Right. And you had an electron microscope to read the directions.
Right.
Yes.
And we had the radiation, the CDV 700 and the CDV 715,
which were the civil defense meters.
Right.
So
with
the little tubes.
The dosimetry tubes were 750s, CDV 750s, and the
those
battery
dosimetry
charger.
tubes, they were on, Bob, when we got on, when we were still in G-pop, they had those were the dosimeters that were on the rig.
I remember taking them off
Well,
squad.
which ones did you have, the gray ones or the yellow?
I had my first introduction on an engine was the gray ones.
The gray ones I replaced when I worked for Jack Fanning in the late 90s. We realized that the CDV ones from the civil defense, the yellow, read in R's. And we were more concerned with the amount of radioactive material being transported around in isotopes and things like that were in lower levels. So we bought the gray ones that read in MRs.
Okay.
And we swapped them out. But the instruments, the 700s and the 715s, they were still good. We kept them on for a while. I think we bought the first, and actually I just saw a picture the other day when I was going through the pictures of John Norman and Dan Sykes, who was the manufacturer, the developer of the DigiAlert 50s. And he ended up selling the company, and the ones you're getting now, the 200s, are not done by Dan anymore. But the picture was John accepting the donation of the first batch from Dan as a donation, and we were able to start putting those out on the apparatus. But the ones that you're talking about, Mike, the gray ones, were in MRs that we bought. That was 98-ish, 99.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I had done a class with the IAFF out in the middle of nowhere, and it was a tech class, and the guy, one of the guys comes up, he goes, "Hey, you know anything about these are our radiation meters, and we've never ever even touched them." And he puts a box down in front of me, and the yellow civil defense meters were still in the original box. The box was all decayed, but let me tell you, man, those MFers, they worked.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh, it's better than the picture. Look at that thing.
You just reminded me of that, Mike. I keep it in my bag that I take when I go and do tech classes.
That's great.
Oh my God! I tell you, with that comes, like, since you've been in the game, What was the most nonsensical rule or practice that you've ever had? Like things that now we look back and we're like, that was ridiculous.
Um, there weren't really anything that was nonsensical. There, we were making things up as we went along.
Based upon what? Like, oh, this worked, so like we'll continue.
Well, some
doing
of it
this?
was stupid trial and error. Did you ever hear what we used to do with the 20-pound propane cylinders from barbecues that were leaking?
Nope.
We would
Please tell me it
try.
involves a sledgehammer.
No, it was much more sophisticated than that. We would try to solve the problem with the valve and try to get it shut down if we could, and if not, despite not supposedly taking hazmats on the apparatus, we used to tie it to the back step of the original second piece, the Mac engine, and we would drive to one of the nearest cemeteries. And we would hook up to a water supply, and we would have two guys in full bunkers and hoods, because we had the hoods back then. And we would charge the line with another two guys, and we would go and open up the tank and get a big vapor cloud over the headstones, and then spread it and disperse it with the hand line with a fog pattern. Then, that would take, even for a 20-pound cylinder, 2 or 3 hours. And, firemen, we want to get done and we want to get back to the firehouse. So, we went, and on one call, we decided we were going to go into the cemetery, and we took an 85-gallon overpack drum. We filled it up 3/4 to 4/5 of the way with water. And two of us went in full bunkers. We had another two on a hand line, fully charged, full bunkers. And we were going to invert the cylinder in the water. And we thought that it would come out and bubble up through the water and dissipate into the air. Well, when you factor in the expansion ratio and the rate it comes out, we opened up the cylinder. It blew all of the water out of the drum, completely enveloped us in a cloud of LPG vapors, stunned the handline team into inactivity, and we were just lucky it didn't find a source of ignition. So we knew never to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So we started to create some of these rules and regulations.
That's...
Yeah.
I would love to have been there for the trial and error portion. I mean, I guess even... there's always trial and error. We're always learning new things and figuring how to make stuff. But that initial, like, hey, let's try this, and then a screw blows out of an acetylene cylinder, or that suddenly there's you're just involved in a propane cloud. Not that we haven't had sort of similar situations.
Sure.
Yeah.
But that's good.
No matter how much we train, my personal belief is that 50% or more of the time we're just dumb lucky.
Yeah.
So
What is
true.
it? God loves drunks and firemen.
Yeah. You still have that ring in the ceiling of the quarters in hazmat?
The
Yes.
ring in the ceiling. I don't know
Yeah.
this story.
Where we overpacked an SCBA without bleeding it, and took the drum with an open head drum, but we had sealed it with the ring and the cover and bolted it shut. And when our logistics guy, Scotty Kirchhoffer at the time, Scotty was a great guy. Haven't seen him in years. I wish I could. But when he went to open it, the drum had pressurized on the inside because the cylinder had opened up in transport. And the whole cover blew off past his face and put a mark in the ceiling on the apparatus floor concrete.
Yep. They painted the ceiling in 04, and I was up there doing something with the Christmas tree, and I said, "Wow, look at this big chunk! It just fell out of the ceiling." And Joe goes, "No, that's not the ceiling falling apart. We put that up there." I was like, "Ah." So he kind of alluded to that. When you said the ring, I'm like, that's how it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had another one with Kevin Cully working one day with us, and Kevin being a chemist. We had a call into Brooklyn, and again, we no meters to speak of really, but there was a fellow that had a business that bid on companies and buildings that went out of business, and he was a salvage bidder. So he had bid on a building that he needed drums. So he went through his 8-foot alley between, one set of row frames and one set on the other side, where he had a 5-bay garage in the back. So he had drums in there with stuff in them, but he needed the drums. So the one drum with probably about 10 or 12 bags of chips of sodium he had in plastic bags, he took them and was throwing them out on the ground so he could get the empty drum. And it was like 7:30 in the morning, so there was a little bit of dew on the ground, and one of the bags burst open and the metal came out, and then he had a little fire going. So he tried to put it out with a garden hose, started popping and spitting at him. So he called the fire department, and the first engine and truck get there, and they take out a bigger hose. So they have a little bigger problem. They call the hazmat company. By the time we get there, there was a pile of sand on the side in the guy's yard that a couple of the truckies with shovels went over and put onto the burning material, and were able to put it out. So we get there. So Kevin's gonna, okay, let's go in, we'll suit up, we'll get a couple of samples. We just suited up in structural gear, took a couple samples of the material out into the street, and we started playing with it to see if we could identify what it was. So he made the conclusion that it was probably sodium, and that we should take an 85-gallon drum in there and overpack it with a bag of Speedy Dry, a layer of Speedy Dry, then a bag, and a layer of Speedy Dry, and a bag. Well, 2 of us were doing that, fully bunkered. And by the time we got to the point where there was about 2 or 3 bags left, we didn't have any more Speedy Dry with us. So we decided to use sand from the same pile that they used to extinguish the initial problem.
Last time,
Worked last time, except they dug from the top surface of the sand. We were digging in the middle that was still damp. So by the time we put the second to last bag in and covered it over with a layer of sand, we bent over to pick up the last bag, we had a little bit of an explosion because it was now confined by the layer of sand. And it was another learning lesson.
I love the learning lessons are my favorite. If there was one thing that we hope to achieve from the podcast in general, it was a hope that people would come on and share their learning lessons. Unfortunately, with social media policies and all this other stuff, nobody wants to come on and actually talk about mistakes. But I find it to be one of the most beneficial parts of everything.
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the things that I always liked about Alan Brunacini and Phoenix. They always put out, they had mistakes. They had people get hurt, and they always wanted you to learn from those things so it wouldn't happen again.
Yeah.
And, we can only push so much under the rug. We got to stop doing that,
Any more close calls that you had back in the day that might be good for future hazmateers?
We had one, couple of guys, Ray Meisenheimer, who was killed in 9/11. We had a call. Kevin Smith, I think, was with them too. He was killed also. In Brooklyn, they had an old sewage treatment plant that had been shut down, and was shut down for 9 years. And the city and the DEP decided they needed it back opened again because of the amount of sewage that they were handling. They needed to treat it. So when the workers went into the tunnel, it was about couldn't have been any more than a 24-inch manhole that you had to go through the manhole. You couldn't fit through with a breathing apparatus, down a concrete wall where the rebar was fashioned into the cement like a ladder going down. When you got down about 10 or 12 feet, there was now a 2x12, like a scaffold plank that went from a pipe, a rung of the ladder, to a pipe on the other side of the room. And the worker went down there, and when he got to the other side, his mission was to open the valve on that other side so that they can then start throwing sewage through again. Well, that sewage was still in there for 9 years. It had never been emptied out. And when it came out, the sewer gases that were built up, the guy just about made it out. get back up the ladder. But now the sewage was coming in and filling up the space. So, and Ray, I don't think either of you ever met Ray.
No.
Ray was a big guy. And I mean, about 6'2", probably 300 pounds. But he was in pretty good shape. I saw him one time having a animated discussion with the captain, John Fatter, at the time. Fatter was sitting at the captain's desk, and Ray was standing in front of him, and they were friends. They lived near each other in Hauppauge. They did things together. Ray, from a standing position, jumped up and stood on the captain's desk. I mean, he was agile for a man his size, but they had to get through the hole one at a time, have their masks handed to them while they had the face piece on, reposition the shoulder straps, go down the rung ladder, walk across this board, almost like a balance beam, but 12 inches wide or 11 and a half, whatever they made them at the time, and get over to the side and shut the door before the sewage got past the board.
Oh.
And we were wearing, we had Nomex jumpsuits at the time. And we had, it was like bronze zippers and buttons and snaps. And they couldn't, what did we put them in? Non-encapsulated level B. So they did the job. They got out of there just in time. And by the time they got up, the board was already covered with stuff. But we got back to quarters. They realized that all of the metal was already tarnished and black from exposure that got through the non-encapsulated level B. They jumped in the showers right away. So we had, that was an interesting call. It's another exposure report.
Yeah, we've had a few exposure. We have one that we talked about where one of the guys battery acid on the Tyvek F, and he duct taped or chem tape the whole 9 yards, but the decon process pushed the acid through the suit into the zipper and ate away his shirt. So when he woke up in the morning, I'm like, Scotty, what happened to your shirt? He's like, oh, I must have snagged it on something. I'm like, dude, your shirt's missing. You didn't snag it on something. It looks like you got acid. Right. I mean, it was gone. It was gone. It's fun little things like that always make things interesting.
Oh yeah.
That's all right. So with that touch with an issue, give me your funniest one.
Funniest one.
Something that you look back now, you're like, boy, that was stupid.
I think all of those lessons learned was pretty stupid now that I look back at them, but they were all about the same. We had a lot of learning lessons through that time. Unfortunately, we had people like Billy Bulkman with pesticides. We had a lot of, in the late 90s or mid 90s, all the picric acids and the crystallized ethers that we had. Again, probably before your time, but they had the one incident in the school where a guy was cleaning out the chemistry lab and he found the crystallized picric acid. So we had to go there. It became a bomb squad issue, and all of a sudden the Department of Education and the universities in the city all did a search of all their chemistry labs, and there was probably several months we were running picric acid calls,
Wow.
one or two a week.
Now, today's day and age, the bomb squad would take over with that. Back then, did hazmat deal with it? And if so, how did you deal with it?
No, if they were crystallized, and we always ran the DEP chemist at that time.
Okay.
Which they were great. They were great in the beginning. Later on, when there were some issues with them working with the NYPD after 9/11 and the police trying to take the hazmat for a while, they weren't as willing partners, but back then they were great. And we would make a decision right away with them. No, we're not handling this one. This is a bomb squad. But even the bomb squad was a little leery because most of these labs were not on the ground floor. So do you have a guy in a bomb suit carry this shock sensitive material down a couple flights of stairs? You don't want to risk putting them in an elevator. So they did come up with another solution at one point if they felt it was safe enough to take the container of the crystallized or crystals around the cap
Mhm.
and put maybe 6 or 8 inches of water in a sink, and then carefully
And just
put the
rehydrate it.
correct.
Yeah.
Huh.
All right.
Yeah.
I have a question. So during, looking back from now to back in the day, what was the biggest change in the hazmat scene? PPE, meters, comms, techniques. I mean, because back in the day, it was level A all the way every day, but like now today, it's not. We don't get into level A's very much. Is it the chemicals haven't changed? The scenarios really haven't changed. What do you think is the biggest change in hazmat? Like what genre?
Well, I think it's both the PPE and the detection technology. Communications, as I go around the country and work with some of these departments, communications is still a problem. It just really still is a problem. But the suits, the first level A's we had with the old Bueller rubber suits, they were not one-time use. We would try to decontaminate them as best we could if there was any way we could, and they were expensive and hot as hell and heavy as hell, and so when you take that and you go through, the ones that came after that, the Tychem 10,000s, and then you got into the Tyvek Fs and the encapsulated and non-encapsulated Bs with the filament or coatings on them, and now you have the multi-threat suits. PPE has come a tremendous distance, and you're right. Back then it was level A all the way, but now even in the training, most of us that do this work, yourselves included, level A, you do everything you can to figure out not to use a level A, as long as it's safe. That we don't want to do that. It's too cumbersome. The dexterity loss, the visual loss, the hearing loss. So that's a big change. And of course, the technology. In the beginning, we had very little. The MSA explosive meter, we had the civil defense rad meters, we had colorimetric tubes. But now you have
A lot of it's up here. You got to know it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But, we do have a great selection of equipment now for detection, but a lot of it is really laboratory stuff that's being made for the field, and it's very hard to stay proficient on a lot of that.
Some of it requires
Totally
a
true.
lot of upkeep.
Absolutely. And it's hard enough for a company like Hazmat, where they're dedicated to only that type of response, to stay up with that stuff. And you go around the country, very few departments have a dedicated hazmat. They have a hazmat company that operates like a squad, where they have multi-missions. And it's even harder for those responders to stay capable and proficient.
I always gave the tech engine guys and the squad guys a lot of credit. They had a lot of balls that they were juggling, and to maintain hazmat, competency is very difficult. We have a question from David Wood, and he says, what was the hazmat response to the first World Trade Center bombing? What were the capabilities at the time?
It was just the one hazmat company. That was all we had. They did go. I was not on that one. Jack Fanning was. He went on there at that time. Yeah, but a lot of it was not hazmat related.
A lot of it not hazmat related.
No.
Okay.
No. On the second one, I had the hazmat team go into the first tower and take all their meters up there with them to try and determine. We knew coming over, I was working on as an executive manager for special operations at headquarters at that time, and on Chief Gansey's staff. And when we were over there, we knew right away that this wasn't an accident, this was an attack. So in my opinion, I needed people up there to determine if there was anything else on this plane that could harm the responders. So they went up there with rad meters, they went up there with chemical detectors, the APDs, and all the stuff that we had at the time to try and make that determination. Then the towers came down. Jack was in the South Tower with the second group that was responding from the medical office that day. We still had the truck. We still had a couple of rescue trucks there and a couple of the squads with equipment. And I started to get people responding in from home or from Hazmat Ops, Stan Ryback and Jeff Borkowski and a couple of the others there. I had them go and get equipment off the trucks and start doing searches around the grounds to make sure that there was nothing else there that we could do. So there was a little bit of a difference between the first bombing and the second one. We had a much more robust capability, more redundancy on the second one than we did on the first. We didn't even have Rescue 5 and the 2 squads on the first one. They didn't come in until 96.
Yeah, it's significant. And there's just nothing, there was no operations taking place in the first one.
Right.
I didn't know Rescue 5 came in that late. I thought they were one of the OGs.
No. Yeah, they didn't come in until, I'm pretty sure it was 96. And then in 97, we started to train the CPCs and the HazTac ambulance units. In 98, I believe we did they formed the new squads. And
yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
And that was an interesting time too. They had the funding for the squads. So we set up the training program for the squads. And there were, we were running at least one class a week, if not 2, doubling up by the time we got done with the first one. And then came June of that month, or the end of May, and we got a call from Von Essen, the commissioner at the time, that they had more money and they wanted to train the other 4 rescues. So we were running 3 hazmat classes a week. They were staggered. We'd start one on Monday. We'd start one on Wednesday. We'd start one on Friday. Vinny Doherty had come over at that time, and he was doing a lot of that training. It was just an incredible time. Just really an amazing amount of great team that we had over there, and just a lot of training.
So that's really when the expansions first took place, was 98 with the additions of the squads.
Well, that was the addition to the hazmat tech level in 96 when Jack was the chief, and I believe Phil had something to do with that too. They started the concept of the CPC and the HazTac, and they had trained a couple of each. And then Jack asked me to come back from the field as a captain to start the hazmat school. So I came over there in April of 97. And my first 2 instructors were Tony Musafidi and Dave Fenton from EMS. And we started doing the EMS classes over at Fort Totten. And we started doing CPC classes at Building 8 at the Academy. They had no money for the class, no money for classes. They did tell us, they heard that Governor's Island was shutting down the Coast Guard station, that if we wanted anything from their station, we could go and get it. So Dave and Tony and I went to Fleet Services. We each drove a rack truck to the ferry, took the ferry over to Governor's Island, went into their Coast Guard facility, and we took every chair and table and desk, any chalkboards or anything like that we could, loaded up those rack trucks and brought them back. And that was how we started. Lockers, we got lockers from there too. That's how we started putting together.
They didn't really show it
right,
down.
I was just going to say, after you were arrested and released for theft of government property.
No, the Coast Guard had told them
they did.
That they could do that, yeah.
I was going to say, because that would be,
thank goodness.
That would be a phenomenal prank if it actually went all the way. Which actually, what were some of the, speaking of pranks, what would be some of the more memorable pranks that happened in the firehouse in your head in the time of being a firefighter? I know that officers and chiefs are, non-pranking personnel, but before you gave all that up.
Well, of course, I didn't participate in any of these,
No,
Of course not. Neither did
You
I.
heard these.
and some of them, even back then, were pretty stupid. But yeah, yeah, most of the normal stuff. Some of the more memorable ones occurred when I went to the National Fire Academy. I went down there with another fellow from hazmat, Al Schwartz, and we were in the site ops class. And Phil was, if Phil's laughing, he's going to probably get red faced. Not that he doesn't know, but just hearing it over again. Phil was the assistant teacher or instructor down there for the class. And he was impeccably dressed every day in a suit and a tie. And Al, every day on the first break, Phil was always drinking soda from a can. Every day on that first break, Al would go and punch a hole in the can on the side of the top. And every day, coming back on the break, he would spill it on his tie. So the Friday comes from the first week, and Al was a big hockey guy, so he had tickets for the Washington Capitals. He and I were sharing a room at the Fire Academy, so he had 2 tickets. I went with him down to watch the Rangers and the Capitals play. We got back at like midnight, and Phil had used a key to get into our room. And took anything that they could possibly get: shoelaces, belts, pants, sheets, clothes, and tied them at the ceiling level in knots around the sprinkler pipe. So we let it go for the weekend. We let it go until Monday around one of the breaks. We went into the room, the chemical storage room, and we borrowed a little of the green sewer dye. And that night, we went into the bathrooms and we did the old saran wrap on the toilet bowls, and we unscrewed the shower heads and put green sewer dye in the shower heads. So all you could hear at 5 o'clock in the morning, "You mother effer, I'll kill you."
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Yeah. And the names have been changed to protect the guilty. So. They had one fireman that came into the engine before it was a squad, and he was right out of college. I think the only job he had ever done was for his uncle in a computer store, and Ray, the big guy I mentioned earlier, and a couple of others got him into a challenge that Ray could not put him in the life-saving rope harness and haul him up the pole hole. Back and forth. "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." So finally he agrees to do it. Of course, there were like 2 or 3 other guys up there. They hauled him up halfway. And so now he's suspended. And they charged one of the inch and a half lines. And it was like shooting ducks in the gallery. And stuff was dumped on him. Thank goodness the battalion chief came along to put an end to that.
Those damn Chiefs.
Unbelievable.
Such fun sponges.
Yeah. But no, that's really beyond hazing. That's really kind of crazy.
That's love.
And unfortunately, the fellow resigned.
Really? Over that?
Yeah.
Over it? Wow.
I don't know if it was over that, but that might have been one of the things. He just, it's one of those things where you find the thin skin part and you just keep poking it. And that's why we gotta watch that stuff, and we gotta cut it out, because we put a lot of money into training that fellow, and then we lose him.
See, I always go more towards the, hey, we need to thicken their skin. Like that. But we have different philosophies, and that's okay.
Well, that's like lesson 201 when you go to lieutenants, and then it becomes lesson 301 as a captain, and you get it again as a chief. There's the other side of that this is a business, and we don't have an unlimited supply of funding, and we really need to maintain the people that we put an investment in, and keep them safe. So,
I'm gonna throw the next question out, but I'd like to take a 5-minute break, and what were some of the initiatives or changes that you strongly opposed? And now we are here in hindsight. How did that work out? So take 5 minutes, everybody. We're going to go hit the head and we'll be right back. we're back like we never left.
Empty bladders and full bellies.
There you go.
I love it. So I was asking before the break, what was their changes you strongly opposed? And looking back, what do you think of them now?
Well, I got a couple of them. Probably the biggest one that impacted me as well as the FDNY Hazmat group was Police Commissioner Kelly and his one chief, Phil Pulaski, and the police ability to change Mayor Bloomberg and his mind about hazmat. And they changed the mayoral directive of 92 from Mayor Koch, giving hazmat control to the FDNY, giving control to the NYPD in 2003, I think it was. And that they would be in charge of all hazmat and terrorist incidents until they determined if terrorism was involved or not. And that was a big piece. We went from at the height of the white powder, and just to refresh everybody's mind on that, in September of 2001, we had the 9/11. In October, we had the anthrax. In November, we had the plane crash in the Rockaways.
Ball Harbor. Yeah.
In December, we had the titanium chiller explosion at One Penn Plaza. In January, we had another chiller unit go at the World Trade Center site. We had like about 5 or 6 months in a row with some big things. But the height of the white powder, when we were doing, I set up the hammer teams with Tom Portell, who was the chief of the NYPD SOD at the time. We were running 12 hammer teams a day, and we were at the height up to about 250 white powder calls a day. And then on January 1st, we got none, because they then controlled 9/11, and all of the white powder calls went to the police department until they determined whether it was terrorism or not. And that was a battle that I lost. The fire department lost, and the PD got the mayoral directive changed for them to be in charge. Now,
so just explain that, because in New York City, there's what we call a matrix, right? And so who owns what incident? Like if a hazmat happens in a driveway, it's this agency. If it happens in the street, it's this agency, right? So it's kind of like a
there are some differences like that. Ray Downey, Frank Carruthers, Jack Fanning, and myself represented the fire department for a lot of those meetings with the counterparts in NYPD SOD in the late 90s. And you're right, it did get to that. You know, if there was a building collapse or a building issue, it was the fire department. And the police department then said, well, scaffolding is not part of the building. We'll take scaffolds. Yeah, that was a period of time when there were some conflicts on a regular basis, unfortunately, between some of the fire department units and some of the police department units, particularly in the ESU. That's when they were starting to outfit themselves with Hearst tools and starting to go to the crashes. The biggest issue for me with the change in the mayoral directive was that the police department, ESU, became very particular. If you had a white powder call at a news agency on the west side of Manhattan, like ABC or NBC, they'd be, 90 miles an hour, guns blazing to get in there first. But if you have an overturned drum on the Staten Island Expressway, you wouldn't see them. So that, to me, was not a benefit to the city. That was a problem that was not creating an equal service for all of these different types of calls, and it needed to be corrected. Chief Esposito, the acting chief of department, was able to work with the fire department and the mayor's office and the police, and a lot of that has been changed back now, from my understanding and speaking with him, which is the way it should be, because ESU as kind of like as you mentioned before about our rescues and the squads, they have many missions. And the ESU, if there was anything that involved law enforcement or a barricade or a hostage or an active shooter, they were not coming to the hazmat. They were going to do their law enforcement mission first. They weren't dedicated. The hazmat company one being dedicated, that should have been an easy call to make sure that the fire department was handling those all the time. We had the tiered response with many more units. That was the whole purpose of the hazmat tech engines, the squads, the rescues, and the hazmat. We could get a tech trained company to the scene within 10 minutes, no matter what time of day, what day of the week, what week of the year, and start to get some more experienced people on the scene to at least size the situation up and then handle it. So there was a lot of issues with that one. Another one was at one point when we were doing all of that training for the companies in the late 90s, there was an edict that came down from the commissioner's office that the EPA was doing 40-hour technician classes over in Edison, New Jersey. Why did we need 80? You now have to do 40.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, and we fought that pretty hard, but lost it.
What were they trying to do? Did they do the hazmat or 40, and that was the end of it?
Pretty much. And we went through the training. I had two issues with that at the time, and one of them being some of the equipment didn't come in with all those units, so we didn't train them on some of that equipment. Maybe 4 or 5 pieces of equipment that were support materials that we put on the apparatus when it first came in. And I had OSHA come in and do an audit on me. And we had to pull that equipment from the trucks and then bring everybody back to train them on that equipment before we could reposition it back on the apparatus, which is the right thing to do. It wasn't our intent to try and skirt around the OSHA. It's just that the timing on the delivery wasn't there, and the fact that the classes were shorted in terms of training hours. What Captain Doherty and our team did was track the calls, and we started to identify calls like acid spills and overall corrosive spills, where some of the tech companies were going out and trying to do slurry solutions and neutralize things in the street, and we had never trained them on that. Because it was cut out of the program. So we were able to document all of that material. We took it back to the commissioner's office, the chief's office, and we were able to get the 80 hours back. Even 80, as you both know, is not enough.
No.
But 80 is enough at one shot. You keep somebody there for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks and just keep pounding this stuff into them day after day. It's not enough. You gotta give them a base amount to keep them safe. Let them go out and experience and train on that a little bit more, and then you can bring them back and start to give them additional training.
I always say, but going to tech class is the equivalent of a firefighter going to Proby school. Like, you don't get out of Proby school knowing how to be a firefighter. Proby school just keeps you alive long enough to learn your job that first year of probation. Right. Mm-hmm. And tech school is the same way, and always try to push that, especially with the chiefs and the officers that are in the room, because they sometimes people walk out of the tech class being like, oh well, they've taught me everything I need to know, and I'm like, not even close.
Yeah, but not only close in terms of training, but it was always my opinion and others that once you get out of the training class, you need at least 2 years of field experience before you could really be a safe technician. Yeah. And not a part-time guy. You need to be, doing it on a regular basis, handling the equipment on a regular basis, working on the meters on a regular basis.
Yeah, because it's a lot. It is definitely to you see the guys that come into the company and they are overwhelmed with trying to catch up and learn every piece on the apparatus and doing the testing that we do to them to get them to the point that they're proficient. In your time there, is there a piece of advice or a trick from a senior guy that you still remember vividly? Like, is there a takeaway that you could be like, man, that guy's advice changed my life?
Well, just two that I've always lived by myself as from things that I've learned over the years. One, take every opportunity to learn. If you have an opportunity to get some additional training, some additional class or school that you can go to, take it. Remember that you're going to learn from everybody. You know, going out to a hazmat class, delivering it for the IAFF or on my own as a consultant, I expect to learn things from the students in the class, whether they have any hazmat experience or not, because different parts of the country handle things differently. They have different equipment. You're always going to learn something if you keep your mind open. And the other thing, as a boss, I always tried to be a mentor. I'm really thankful for Jack Fanning and the mentoring that he gave me. And I always tried to pass that along. When I was a specialist in hazmat, it was always one of my thoughts when I first got promoted to try and get back there as the captain. And when the opportunity arose to become the captain, I realized that there was more of an opportunity for me to stay as Jack Fanning's XO to work on a bigger scale than being the captain. So I did turn that down. Vinnie Doherty then became the captain there for a few years. And so I always try to mentor people as they come along. I worked with Nick and the other chiefs before I left. I worked with Timmy Rice before I left. I fought hard to get him to shadow me for over a year before I left as the WMD chief, so that he would learn the network that I had, that he would know who to call when he needed advice or had questions, and tried to bring him onto all of the committees. Another big challenge that I had was at the national level. Not only being on the 472 committee at the time, but I was the chair of the interagency board for the standardization of hazmat WMD equipment. And ASTM had contacted, which is another standards making entity, had contacted the NFPA that law enforcement wanted ASTM to develop a hazmat standard of response for law enforcement people. That they felt that the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association standard, was not for law enforcement. It was only for firefighters. So that was when we had a lot of meetings between the ASTM, law enforcement reps, IAB, NFPA, and we determined that in the next edition of the 472, we would pull only the core operations piece, and then stuff beyond that would be the mission specific. That's when we started to develop that extra chapter in that thing, so that the core could be applied to any discipline, EMS, law enforcement, fire, and then based on the mission that your AHJ was looking for you to perform to, that you would get the additional training. If you were law enforcement and you were a evidence collection team personnel, that you need some sort of PPE and respiratory protection and gloves and sampling equipment to go and collect potentially contaminated evidence, then you would have to get that additional training above court. The firefighter gets diking and damming and foam and vapor dispersion, because that's what we're expected to do. And that was always part of our mission, but it was then pulled out of what we call core operations and made mission specific, so that we could tell ASTM and law enforcement, and they eventually agreed, that you only needed one hazmat standard. The hazard is the same. It doesn't matter what uniform you're wearing, but the mission that you do requires additional training. So here's the basic standard for hazmat response to keep you safe. Then, depending on what mission you're going to be assigned, you have to get the additional PPE or detection equipment or sampling equipment, et cetera, to be safe and be able to perform the job. So that was probably a year or two battle that we had. It was a a good discussion. Let's put it that way.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one because it's probably going to be the same answer that I would have, which is take them all. But what do you suggest for outside government funded classes such as Live Agent in Alabama, RAD in Nevada, or BOMB in New Mexico?
Well, it's an interesting question. What do I suggest that they do in their curriculum?
The question just came in at what do you suggest for outside government funded classes?
Okay. Well, as you know, we're fully supportive of those classes. We include those classes for our hazmat people in the squads, the rescues, and the hazmat as part of their base funding for them to be able to get the hazmat pin. So I fully support those. And I really hope that the federal government continues to fund the members going there. It would also be nice if they funded the backfill for the departments, because a lot of smaller departments have trouble with backfilling their frontline positions when they send people away to school. With a large number that we have, it's a little bit easier. I would just want to, and I went to the RAD school. I audited the pilot in 1999. And what I would like to see in those programs is that, and they have done this a lot better, put people in there that develop the curriculum and are the instructors that actually do the work or have done the work and have the background experience. When we did the RAD pilot in 99, the instructors were all ex-military, except for one, the medical doctor, who was a Russian doctor who had actually worked on some of the patients from Chernobyl.
Really?
And, oh yeah. So he had some great stories, but one of the big things, Glenn Rudner was in the class with me in that pilot audit, and we probably wrote 7 pages of suggestions or recommendations for them. And the big one was, you need a hazmat tech from public sector to help you make this curriculum fit the actual mission that we do in the street. The military does not have that background knowledge. It's not that they're not smart enough to do that; they just don't have the experience. So that's what they needed to do, and I'm pretty sure they did a little bit more of that when they moved. They changed the chemical agent school in Anniston from military run to a separate entity when they moved the DOD Chem School to Kansas, Fort Leavenworth, or whatever the area is over there. The bomb school was great. I always thought that was especially good for fire officers to go to that one. Not so much from the point of learning how to make the bombs, but understanding the different types of bombs, the different sizes, how far you needed to stand back to be safe from them, how far fragmentation / evidence went, how to try to go in and do our mission of life safety and extrication of victims without damaging or destroying too much of the evidence. Clear one path in, stay with that one path, don't come in from 360.
Right.
And the power of those explosives. That was always my main belief in sending people to that class, just to get that safety perspective. So I always believe the one in Dugway, when we used to do the live agent, the bio school out in Dugway, I always believed that was a good one too. In the beginning, even before Anniston, in the late 90s, we had probably 2 or 3 of our members of the company go to another country for live chem training with real agents. That was really top notch. But once the Anniston opened up that we went as a tag along with a DOD military unit, CBRF, as we did the first training exercise with CBRF in 1997. And we had the whole team come up. That was always a memorable story that sticks in my head on that one. The sergeant major, a fellow by the name of Bob Massey, was a great guy. The first commander of the Seabirth was a fellow by the name of Colonel Smoots. His big takeaway after the incident was he realized that coming in as a Marine Corps colonel, not used to having to take orders from too many people, that when he was coming in, he wasn't coming in to take over the incident. He was coming in a support role. And the sergeant major, he was a great guy, a lot of experience. We put all their troops through the smokehouse, the maze. We had them do a whole bunch of different scenarios. And on one of the particular days, I was overseeing the smokehouse. So they were coming in 2 at a time and going through. One team that came in was a male and female Marine, and they were both, I thought they were going to go to blows after about 10 minutes. I told you we're going to the left. No, I told you we're going to the right. Neither one of them wanted to bow to the other. But then a couple of teams after that, Bob Massey came to me and said, the chaplain wants to go through the smokehouse too. I said, Bob, he's a little bit older. He looks like he's in his 50s. He said he is. But the chaplain does everything we do. I said, are you sure, Bob? He said, yes. I said, okay. So I'm watching them as they're crawling through, the young Marine and the chaplain, and I can hear the chaplain's breathing. I stop him. Chaplain, you okay? Yes, I'm okay. I'm okay. Goes in another 10 or 12 feet, and it's worse. Chaplain, you sure you're okay? Yeah. So he goes for another 7 or 8 feet, and now it's really bad. So now myself and the other Marine help him out. We got him opened up, the mask's off. He's leaning against a block of concrete. One of the other young Marines goes and gets Bob Massey. They call for a corpsman. They're over there working on him. And Bob tells me, oh, that was close. And I said, what do you mean that was close? He says he had a triple bypass 5 weeks ago. Oh, I said, what?
Information that would have been useful yesterday.
Yeah. Trying to have somebody die on my watch? Come on.
Wow. Yeah, that's well. Even so. I have another question for you. We have a lot of things today, and I'll give you the one that sticks in my head is batteries. And you guys had just about nonstop things that are happening to you back then. Like everything was like a battery. It was a new experience. So like when you had something with no clear guidelines or governing bodies, how did you handle that?
I always relied on the hazmat huddle.
I'm so happy you said that.
That was the big thing. Right from the get-go, we learned right away that nobody knows everything. And even as an officer, I'd go, okay, guys, this is what I'm getting from the boss. This is what we're seeing. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Okay, I got 3 out of 5. I kind of agree with it. Let's do that. Here's the plan. Yeah. And then they would get the equipment, and I would go and brief the incident commander and keep them on the side so that the team could do what they had to do. But that hazmat huddle, it is a challenge sometimes for a boss. If you have some very serious individuals, like a Phil McGardle, or at the time a Dennis Scauzo, people who are very opinionated, very smart, but sometimes were coming at it from different points of view, and you had to, listen to both of them and sort through it. Yeah. And after 9/11, I used to make it a point to, at the start of every technician class, go into class and give the class a briefing of where I thought we were standing at that moment in developing further the tiered response, and adding in the terrorism information. We're building out these units. This is going to be their mission. This is going to be the way the tiered response is going to look. This is why we're breaking it up geographically between the 5 boroughs. And then I'd say, do you have any questions? And I would say, before they asked any of them, I said, if I have the answer, I will tell you. If we don't have an answer, I'm going to make one up for you right now. And that's what we do with all of that stuff. Not so much on the fire ground these days because you have a lot of SOPs. The buildings are the same unless they've been altered, and so you have a lot of procedures and guidelines. But in hazmat, you don't. In the WMD, when that was starting, we did not have a lot of guidelines. So you do what every good boss does. You collect the information, you do your size up, and you make the best decision you can with what you know right now. But we constantly evaluate it. You constantly bring in new information, and if something comes in to make a change, you change the plan. So
You make it sound so easy, yet time and time again, it was so difficult for new officers and chiefs stepping into those roles to just follow those simple steps, and it's a tough one. It's very tough stepping into those roles. I give them, I always gave new officers and chiefs that were responding on scene a lot of credit because, man, they're making decisions on something that they understand they have to rely on everybody else around them to make the right decision.
Well, that's one of the big changes when you go through the ranks. When you go from a fireman to a lieutenant, it's a big change now being the boss of people. You go to a captain, it's a little bit different, not any different in the street than being a lieutenant, but in the office, you got more administrative work. But you're still going in. When you're a chief, you are now standing back and you have to rely on the people to do the job and give you back timely information while you're standing out there waiting for it, and hopefully not stressing too much, but you're standing there and if I was in there, I could get it now. Well, you're not. You got to be a little bit more patient.
Yeah,
and that is very hard for the chiefs coming over into the hazmat that has spent their entire career on the fire side, because they don't have that background and understanding. But it's very hard for a chief not knowing the members of the company, especially a covering officer or a covering chief. Why am I listening to this fireman? I'm a chief.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, you got to have the open mind to say, because this guy's been doing this for a while and I haven't, and I really should listen to him and try to understand if what he's telling me is safe, then we're going to go with it. I had some of that in 9/11 when we lost. We lose 5 of the 7 or 8 special op chiefs between the rescue services and hazmat, and during those initial weeks, we didn't have a lot of the FEMA USAR chiefs left. Most of them were gone, and I would get captains from the rescues and squads coming to me saying, we want to go into this area and do a search, but the deputy doesn't understand what we do and how we train, and he's not letting us go in. So I'd have to go over there. I'd talk to the officer first, and I'd say, okay, well, tell me what you want to do. Tell me why you think it's safe. And because I did not have the confined space, the high angle training, but I was a known entity in special ops. So I would go over to the deputy and I'd say, okay, this is what they train for. This is what they're going to do. Here's the safety factors. And they would allow them to get in there. And I had to really rely and know those officers from the rescues and the squads and what their capabilities were. And they were all great. They were all great. They were all very careful about the safety of their men. So sometimes you just need to be able to take that information and present it to the chief in a way that they understand.
I love it. You sent us in some pictures, and I'd like to kind of wrap up things on this because some of the pictures are rather impressive. I'll start with this one.
Ooh.
Well, this was the individual on the left is me. This was after the South Tower came down. Prior to that, even before the second plane got hit, the second tower got hit, this ramp that you see in the foreground here was the ramp that went down to the parking garage underneath the World Financial Center across from the North Tower. And Chief Gansey set up his command post at the top of the ramp, and we had a communications van there with some radios and the command board. They still had Chief Pete from the division and Joe Pfeiffer, the battalion, in the command post in the lobby. We were stacking ladders up on one side and engines on the other side of the ramp down into the garage. I had already had an ESU sergeant and one of his officers go into the garage and do a search down there. I wanted to make sure that it was clear and clean and there were no issues down there, because I thought if anything happened, we would use it as an escape area, which is when the South Tower came down, we ended up going back into there. The picture itself was taken by a Daily News photographer, and I didn't know about it at the time, but probably about a month or two after 9/11, one of the guys came into the office one day and said that the photographer had set up a photo gallery down on the Lower East Side, and he had gone through there and he thought that I was in one of the pictures. I went down there one day and the photographer was kind enough to give me a copy of the picture.
Wow.
So
That's some picture.
that was some day.
Yeah. How about this one?
That's Nicky Riaz on the left and me. Nicky was an original member of Engine 288. He was one of the first guys, I think, to come over to the hazmat company. Eventually, got promoted to fire marshal and went out with Tom Daly, one of the other charter members. We were dealing with, I think, a rack truck with acetylene cylinders on fire on one of the expressways.
Unbelievable. That's good stuff, man. Look at this. Look at this handsome buck.
I didn't realize how much you look like Stu.
Yeah, I think it's the other way around.
Oh yes, how much Stu look like you? Yes.
Yeah,
that's
except they got a couple more inches.
You know what's interesting is that your front piece and mine is a little differently because we didn't have hazmat across the top. We had the H and the M on the sides. What happened with that?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Was it just somebody in purchasing said, whatever, we're just buying this?
I think the rescue companies at the time had rescue across the top. So because we were getting the blue background, the same as rescues, because we were all going to be in SOC, that was designed that way.
That's a little known thing. That's a little factoid right there, is that if you look at the radio designation, like for those of you that are not in New York City, if you click your radio, you get a certain code for that radio, that designation. And so 100 was the rescues and hazmat ones was 1006.
Right.
The 6th rescue.
Right.
So
yeah, I had that handlebar mustache until I got promoted to lieutenant, and the same deputy chief twice pulled me off the fire ground and told me
listen, you hippie,
to get rid of it. That was on my promotion to chief, and Jack Fanning congratulating me.
Looking good.
He was a great mentor. Unbelievable. This was a seminar we put on at the Academy in Building 9. There was right next to me Steve Mussolino from the DOE RAP team, Janine Prudhomme from DOHMH, who co-chaired the development of the radiation response plan with me for the city. And beyond that was Brooke Buttermeyer from Lawrence Livermore, who we had been doing a lot of work on a 10 KT response. And we did a presentation at the Academy. It was pretty full. We had a pretty good turnout.
I like it.
Con Edison transformer type of fire. I'm giving some advice, recommendations to Con Edison and to the chief.
We went to a lot of these things, it seems like. I mean, with New York City being an infrastructure such as it was, where, again, it's not a slight at Consolidated Edison. They have an infrastructure that's constantly evolving from literally 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Stuff goes sideways all the time.
Oh, yeah. And they still have what the asbestos coatings on the steam pipes below 34th Street. The Gramercy Park job that we did way back when. They had the water main break and the cold water hit the steam pipe, and the temperature change ruptured the pipe, and we had asbestos. I think it went up 7 stories into an open window in a high-rise residential, and we didn't think about it until 3 days later when a covering officer in an engine company in Manhattan went to check out the hose lay in the bed of the truck on his first tour there, and found chunks of asbestos in there like the size of basketballs. And then all of a sudden we were, and I know they just went through this recently, we were driving engines in Tyveks and APRs to a site where they had contractors come in hired by Con Edison. It was really kind of interesting. We had the Polish crew, the Chinese crew, and the Latin crew that they hired. And they had like 20 or 30 of them at each of these different pads, and they were working. The Chinese crew was really funny because they had put slits in the bottoms of the Tyvek so they could wear their flip flops.
I love it.
Totally within OSHA protocol.
Yeah.
This was, I was lucky enough to get invited by the International Association of Fire Chiefs. I was on their hazmat committee for 9 years to a trip to Israel. This was in the Hadassah Hospital. It was pretty interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, that was one of the things, the opportunities that came along to me and others in hazmat. I've been to Israel 3 times with them. I've done dirty bomb testing over there. I've been to India with the Department of Energy to do radiation response training for dirty bombs with their atomic energy people. I've been to Brazil. I've been to England several times. It just, the opportunities were so incredible, and the committees. I probably traveled 20 to 25 weeks a year for 20 years, going to federal meetings and IAF classes, and just
A lot.
one of the
A
other
lot.
big challenges was the NTAs, the non-traditional agents. I had a call from a doctor friend of mine who at the time, he was from Texas, but he was working on the National Security Council. And he said, I need you to come down to a meeting in Washington. We want your thoughts on something. So I said, well, Matt, you got to give me an idea of what I'm going down there for. I need a reason to tell the commissioner and the chief of department, so they let me go. And he said, well, I really can't tell you over the phone. It's not a secure line. And I said, well, can you give me anything? And he said, well, if you go to Barnes and Noble and you buy this book and read it, you'll understand. And I said, well, if I can go and buy it at Barnes and Noble, why can't you just send it to me? And he said, because it's classified material in terms of the state of the federal government. So if I was to send it to you, I'd have to send it by a secured courier in a briefcase, and they'd have to hand it over to you. So I went and I bought the book and I read it, and I went down there, and they gave me a scenario. I think it was one of 2 chiefs from the country that was there, one from California and one from and myself. And he said, so Chief, you got a call for an incident in the subway in New York City, and your first units are arriving on scene, and they got people coming out of the subway, and some of them are collapsing on the ground, some of them are staggering, some are on their hands and knees. You got some coughing. They're starting to release body fluids. What are you thinking? And I said, well, to me, but it sounds like some sort of a nerve agent's been released down there based on signs and symptoms. And he said, okay, what would be your next move? And I'd say, well, I'd try to take out our detectors and see if we could detect anything. And he said, well, you're not going to get any readings. And I said, okay. And they said, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, we're going to probably have our medics treat them for the signs and symptoms. So we'll go with the atropine 2-PAM chloride.
Right.
And he said, okay, that's a good move, but your protocols call for X number of uses and you're not going to get any results. So what are you going to do now? And I said, well, I'm probably going to scratch my head for a few minutes because I've used up the tools in my bag that I know. And he said, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have the civil support team commander from New York come up to the incident commander, tap him on the shoulder, and recommend that he does this and this and this. And I said, you're telling me that the civil service commander from Scotia, New York, who may be able to get down here in less than an hour, is going to, at the time, tell the incident commander his recommendations.
An hour later.
For us to do this, I said, you know that the fire department has to notify the city's Office of Emergency Management to request assistance from the state. They have to go up to the CMO, to the State Emergency Management Office. So then the governor can then authorize the use of the civil service team. And I said, and then he has travel time to come down there. So at least an hour. I said, do you know that in 1993, we had somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 responders at the First World Trade Center in the first 20 to 25 minutes? I said, you telling me, in addition to the public, you're going to put at least 2,000 to 2,500 responders' lives at risk.
Right. So one clown can make his way down.
Yeah. Well, it's not that clown's part. This is the issue that we had for a long time, and Chief Carruthers worked on this, and Mike Pusaferi was really big on this. He took that mission up. In 2007, we had the 16 largest fire departments in the country come together for a conference in Manhattan, and we worked out what protocols the fire service needs to get access to classified information. That we don't need the names of the bad people. We need the materials that they may be using as a weapon, so that we can make sure that we have the protective equipment for it and the detection capability. So the bottom line was, I think that we got the message across to them at the time, but it took from 2007 to 2014 for the federal government to release the spectra for the libraries and the agent detectives that matched up with those NTAs, as well as the advanced medical protocols for better treatment. It took 7 years to get past that point.
Wow.
I had no idea.
I'll give you another one. I got a phone call in the office one day from a former fire marshal that was now working for DHS as a protective security advisor. And he said to me on the phone, you should come over to the LNG facility on the Brooklyn side of the Queens-Brooklyn border for a meeting on Thursday. And I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, we got a meeting. DHS hired a company that does worst case scenario planning for ocean-going LNG tankers. And they hired them to do that for the 2 LNG tanks that are there. And the information, what they told me was, well, I called up and I said, I'd like to come to the meeting. And they said, well, it's confidential information. I told them, well, look, I have top secret clearance with DOE and I have secret clearance with DHS. Will that get me into the meeting? And the guy said, well, gee, I don't know. This is confidential. So I said, well, gee, top secret clearance took me 9 months. They interviewed my neighbors, my family, my peers, my subordinates, my supervisors. They interviewed me for several hours, and it took 9 months to get it. What do I need to get confidential information? He told me,
don't cross your fingers, like make a promise, pinky swear.
No, almost as good. Go to www.dhs.gov. Click on the file for confidential information. Look at the 20 PowerPoint slides, take a 10-question test, and if you pass, we'll mail you a certificate, email. So 20 minutes later, I had the certificate. So now I call them back and say, I got the certificate. I'll email it over to you. They get it, and they say, okay, you can come. So the information that he told me was, yeah. basically, a release of the product in that tank, if it ignited, could produce second-degree burns in 20 seconds at 750 feet. I said, well, if you have a problem with this LNG, what are you going to do? She said, we're going to call the fire department. I said, no, I don't think so. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to go to the commissioner and tell him we should pull you off of the response matrix. He said, what? You can't do that. And I said, you're withholding information from us? You know, within 750 feet, you got the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, the Long Island Expressway, the Gowanus Canal, you got residential neighborhoods, you got commercial businesses in there.
You knew this.
And you're withholding this information. You know, the information about the classification, and I understand the value of it, but we have to get past that.
Yeah.
They have to understand, and this is that siloing of information that we've been fighting for many years. They have to understand that all emergencies are local, and we're going to be the first ones there to handle these issues. And the state comes into support, and then the feds come into support.
I kind of thought that was implied by the role of first responder.
Well, there are reasons for this information. You know, like with the book, the author of the book was a person who came from Russia that was developing these materials, and you know they had reasons for their sources to keep this material classified. But in the meantime, this person had left Russia and was in the United States and writing a book about the project.
Right.
So, you know, they have to protect their sources, but that source, their mindset is could save millions of lives by keeping a source intact versus your 2,500 responders. There's a balance that they have to weigh at the federal level, but it's not the balance we weigh at the local level.
Right.
You know, you're wiping out the entire capabilities of regions, and we have to find a better balance. And they've been working on it, and it's getting better, but it still has some ways to go.
I'm gonna wrap the whole show with this last photo.
Yeah.
Tell us about this for a second.
Well, it's most of the charter members from the company originally. There is another version of it with most of the members' names above it. But it's a lot of the original people.
Let me tell you, guys.
The one in the middle.
Yeah.
I think right in the middle is a guy with like a dark shirt and look like a white undershirt. Second row.
Okay.
I think that's Gil Sullivan. Gil Sullivan, great fireman. He came over from Rescue 4 to be part of Hazmat 1. Gil would have given up the job in the FDNY if he could have been hired by the Boston Fire Department. He loved it up there.
Really?
And he had a friend up there, Leary, that was in one of the rescues in Boston who was coming down to the FDNY all the time. And on one of Gil's trips up to Boston, on his way back, he was coming through Connecticut, and he was monitoring radios all the time. There was the L'Ambiance Plaza collapse. They had construction workers inside the collapse, and he kind of edged his way up and told the incident commander, "Hey, Hazmat 1's got listening devices and thermal imaging cameras." This was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Nobody else had those. So Vinny Doherty and I were on entry that night. We got driven to the border with police escort, and then got transferred over to Connecticut state police cars, and got transported up there. And Vinny and Gil and I were searching the rubble with listening devices and thermal imaging cameras. Every guy in that company had a story behind them that it just made it a great crew.
Unbelievable. I gotta say, you know what? It's been 2 hours, and it feels like we just started. We got to do this again. Like, legitimately, I need more. I'm gonna get you new questions though. We're not gonna ask you the same crap anymore.
Round 2
Well,
questions. They get
Round
harder.
2. These questions are double the points, and
What is the air speed velocity of an unladen swallow?
You're going to get me on that one.
Chief, thank you so much for spending a night with us. I hope everybody that's listening to this got a little something. The questions and the comment section on both Facebook and YouTube has been alive, probably more than any other show we've ever had doing the After Action Report. So I cannot wait for part 2. Already people are asking for please part 2 on Facebook. So we'll have to oblige.
Let me know
Thanks.
when your schedule has an opening.
Very much
All right.
appreciated,
We'll
Chief.
see you
We're gonna
tomorrow.
See you soon.
All right. Have a good night. And thank you.
Goodbye.
Good night,
Good night.
guys.
Good night.